Hey everyone. All right, so here today to talk about empathy in development, more specifically web development. Just a quick background on me. My name is Stephen Word. I'm a WordPress core contributor. I spend most of my development efforts working on WordPress core with WP Engine. Right now I'm maintaining the RSS feeds component. And if that's something that you have any pain points with, catch me afterwards. I would love to talk to you about it. Could always use help. I'm also a plugin author. I've been trying to write decent plugins for the last 3 to 5 years, and I'm getting better at it all the time. I'm also a native Texan. Do we have any fellow Texans out here? Yeah. All right, well, those guys understand why I had to tell you all that. It's just a thing. Got to state the pride. So what we're talking about is empathy, and that's that human emotion that allows you to truly feel the feelings and the emotions of another person, right? It's not understanding their problem. It's actually feeling it and knowing that problem, and it's something that doesn't typically get associated with software development very often. So one of the reasons that I wanted to do this is that the concept of empathy is very hard. It's hard for me. It's not something that I do very naturally. Something that I really have to work at, and I'm the guy on the plane. I have a hard time, being patient with the new family, with the baby, or the guy on the subway who's playing Bejeweled at full volume. Like I have very little patience for these things, but I recognize that in myself, and by recognizing that, I'm able to work on it. All right, so this is a quote that I think I actually got this from Sam Hotchkiss off of a Facebook update, but it really resonated with me. And it says that everyone you meet is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. That guy playing Bejeweled, I know nothing about his day, right? All I know is that I got annoyed. And that's not a very empathetic way to look at that situation, right? He could have just been laid off. He could have just won the lottery. But the point is that I just don't know. And that was, All right, so what does that mean as far as web development goes? Normally when empathy gets brought up in the context of development, we think of it kind of in the UX space. How are we interacting with our users, the responsibility to the users. But there's a whole other side of this, and it's one that I don't think gets enough attention. The empathy for each other, from developer to developer, from creative to creative. Writing code in a way that will make you feel better in the future, will make other people feel better in the future. These are practices, and there's ways to do this to truly connect with the software in ways that we don't typically do, because it either takes too much work, it takes too much time, it's too expensive, it doesn't seem important. Well, here's another thought, kind of a derivative of the quote that we saw a minute ago. And that is that people may use your code in ways that you know nothing about yet. I think that WordPress is a really good example of this. Back when the author of B2 first wrote that software, do you think that he had ever envisioned social networks in BuddyPress? Probably not. And there's some artifacts in those things that make their way into the software we write now. And it's important to keep in mind that you're not just writing code for today or tomorrow, you're writing it for the future. So what is empathetic code? So empathetic code should be human readable, right? If we want people to feel good about the work they're doing, and you want to feel good about yourself as a developer, you need to be able to understand what you're looking at it in a quick way. There's a couple of things that go into this, such as documentation, comments, those things make it readable. But spacing also makes a difference, right? Scannability, naming conventions, what you name your functions matters. Right? Have you ever been in a situation where you are trying to get a piece of functionality to work and you're like, wow, I really wish that there was a method or this function with this name. And you type it into your IDE and there it is. It's the best feeling in the world. It feels great because you knew the problem, you found the solution, and because it was intuitive, someone had taken care of that thought for you and you were able to just use it and go back to work. Empathetic code should be easy for someone who has never touched it to jump in and get started. I think that, having been in the WordPress space for so long, like this is where I do a lot of my development. And I think it's almost easy to forget what you know. The guy that is coming in straight out of college, or maybe this is his first programming job, he's not less smart than you or I, right? He's less experienced. And we can help drive the community and drive the software by making sure that our code is friendly to him and that we're supportive along the way. We also want to make sure that we're considerate to our international users. I was looking through a plugin the other day, and I found a piece of logic that was connected to an English string. It was something to the effect of, if the button value equals submit, then we're going to perform these series of actions. Well, that works fine and well in English, which is probably the developer's original language. But once you got to a point where you are internationalizing that, then that logic is no longer going to function, right? The word upload is not upload in French. We also need to make sure that we, support accessibility. This is one of those things that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and I think it's because it doesn't relate to a lot of us, right? This is the empathetic problem. Most of us don't have a speech or sight or hearing deficits. Some of us do, but not everybody, and that's something that it's very hard to imagine if you're not in that position. And so ultimately, what the idea is just that we need to make code accessible for everyone, because it will come back to you. So why should it be important to you? Right? Well, someone else is probably going to contribute to your project. If it's a good project and you've done well, you're going to get an audience, right? And you want the barrier of entry for people that are going to help you out with this code to be as low as possible. You don't want them scratching their head trying to figure out what your existing code is doing. You'd rather them look at a comment or some documentation. It's another really good feeling when you're trying to figure out how to make something work and someone has taken the time to write the documentation, right? Like, searching for documentation or trying to figure out how something works because it's not documented is not one of my favorite parts of the job, right? It's painstaking, and you know that it should work, and you've seen other people make it work. You just don't have the information you need to be effective. You will reuse your code later. We've all been there. We're at the end of a project deadline. Your client or your project manager walks up, and you just have to get it done. The project's late, so what are you going to do? What I do is I look through my old code. I've done this type stuff before, right? More likely than not, I have something similar that I can reuse. So think about that for a minute. If the code is propagating and I'm reusing it, wouldn't it have been better if I had just done these things, the empathetic things, originally, right? If I'm going to reuse this code that I'm using, wouldn't it have been better if I had just gone back and added internationalization and accessibility round one? I'm going to reuse the code for years. Ultimately in WordPress, we have a mission. It's in our philosophy. We're trying to democratize publishing. This is a really big responsibility. If you think back to the days of the printing press, like that was one of the biggest revolutions that people had ever seen. It gave voices to people that didn't have the ability to communicate with large groups of people. And if you really think about it, WordPress is just an iteration on that. It's enabling people from all over the world, from different backgrounds, that are different than you and I, or from each other, a voice. And that's something that we need to be enabling, and when we write code, we want to make sure that we are promoting that and not hindering that type of behavior. Something else that I think I kind of struggle with, and I know from watching Chris Lima talk, and the imposter syndrome. This is a really big problem in developer communities, and I don't want to talk about it in great depth because it's been discussed. But it's important to realize that you are thought leaders, the people in this room, right? This is the greatest WordPress developer conference on earth, right? Everyone here is important. You will be emulated. You're respected. People look up to you. It doesn't feel that way because you can look across the room and you can say that person knows more than me, or I don't know what they know. But it's a two-way street. And ultimately, it's the right thing to do. I like to think that we take the high ground in the WordPress community, try to include everybody, and make sure that we are doing this the best way that we are, or that we can. We're not perfect, but we influence 23% of the web, and that's a statistic that gets thrown around a lot. But just think about what that really means, right? If you're writing code, it can matter to a large, like a vast number of people that you may never ever meet. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but code does propagate. Bad code propagates, good code propagates. If you answer a support question in Stack Exchange where someone has a question, if you don't give that the full attention that it deserves, that's going to live in Stack Exchange, and someone else is going to copy that out, and they're going to use it again. And now your bad code is making the problem worse instead of better. People fork your repos all the time. Whether you get the star indicator on GitHub, but it's not unheard of. I put projects up there because I don't want to pay for version control, and then all of a sudden, someone else is doing pull requests or reporting issues. Another way the code propagates is the WordPress way and through emulation. One of the things that I find myself doing is that when I'm trying to address a particular problem or find a solution, I will go dig through core. I think that that's probably one of the better ways to do it. Now, core is significantly more empathetic, generally. It adopts most of these practices because you have an audience, a group of maintainers that are working to make sure that these things happen. We also have hero emulation, which kind of goes into the imposter thing I was talking about. If you have a plugin and it's used, people are going to look at that and they're going to learn from it, and they're going to assume that you know what you're talking about. I think that you owe it to the people that use the software to make sure that you're doing it in a responsible manner. So this is just a quick example of that string logic I was talking about, where the form was being submitted on the actual word submit, which is not international. And I don't wish to call it the plugin, but it was a popular one, and it's something that I would like to see some serious effort put behind. All right, so on internationalization, I kind of like to share just a quick personal story that I have with this. When I first started getting into doing plugins for the first time, they weren't great, right? I didn't do it necessarily the best way that I could. And then something kind of lit a fire in me, and I decided that, I think that I'm going to take a piece of functionality, I'm just going to do the best that I can. I'm going to follow the code standards, I'm going to put in all the comments, all the PHP doc. I'm just going to do this the best that I can. It was a very simple plugin. Functionality is that it automatically friends users with a pre-registered list of users in BuddyPress. Someone joins the site, they automatically get a friend when they sign up, kind of like Tom from MySpace, I suppose. So I put all this effort in, and I probably put a good 20 hours into just doing this, right? Trying to make it the best I could. And for the first year, I probably only saw like 100 to 200 downloads. It was a very niche, product, if you want to call it that. But it never really saw a large adoption. In October 2013, I got an email when I woke up one morning, and in my inbox, from a guy named Renato Alvarez from Portugal. And he was telling me that he was working on a BuddyPress site in Portugal, and he wanted to use the plugin. But the development staff that he was working with was not universally English speaking. So he wanted to know if I would put in the time to translate the plugin, or not translate it, but to put in the translating functions. I kind of put that off. I didn't get it back to him as quickly as I could, and I regret that now. But when I did, it took him about 3 days to get back to me. And now my plugin's in Portuguese. Now, about a month after that, someone else contacted me from Spain. This time they didn't ask for anything. They just sent me a file, right? And I included it in the plugin, and now the plugin's available in Spanish. I don't know Spanish and Portuguese. And here's the interesting things about this. So here's a map of native English speakers. So the dark blue represents people that speak English as a primary language. And then the lighter blue, I realize is a little hard to see, are countries that have English as a language, but it's not the primary source of communication. So as you can see, this includes to 360 million native English speakers. Now that's not the number of people that speak English in the world, but that is people that do it naturally or as their first language. It comes to 5.43% of the global population. Spanish. So Spanish. There's actually more native Spanish speakers in the world than English, coming in at 6.15% with about 400 million. Portuguese is a little bit less represented, but still not insignificant. Countries like Brazil and Spain, you get 3.27% of the global market. So here's what's interesting to me about that. When I wrote that original plugin, I spent 40 hours to do it. All right? I got about 100 downloads. It reached a very limited audience. The translating of that plugin took probably 30 minutes to a half hour. Now I'm up in the thousands, I'm helping people, and I'm reaching more people potentially than I would have if I had just done it in English. And I think that's something that we don't really think about, right? You get your code into the repo, and you get your reviews or your stars and your pats on the back, and you get your praise from your peers. Well, they're your peers, right? You can help so many more people than just the people that you surround yourself by. And this is a really good example of that. So there are some challenges in implementing empathetic development practices. It's not terribly complicated things, right? Like, I mean, comments and documentation, that's pretty simple stuff, but most of us don't do it unless we're held to it. And, it does take extra work, and it's not immediately visible to the users always. It is more expensive. I mean, can you imagine if you walked into your manager's office and tried to explain that the reason you missed your deadline was because you were trying to be a better empathetic programmer, that you're trying to consider programmers for the future? They may not care, right? They have a client that they have to answer to, and they need the bottom line. So that's a roadblock. It may not seem necessary, and this is kind of what I was talking about with the peer groups. it took me 2 years to take that plugin and internationalize it because it wasn't high enough on my priority list, even when I already had the objective of trying to make it as good as I possibly could. And I think that was largely due to my inability to empathize with the greater software community. Empathy is transient, right? So what I mean by that is when you have that emotional connection and you feel or you get that sense of joy from finding the right function or helping out a coworker, it's ever fading. Right? Whatever connection or emotional connection you feel is going to diminish over time. We have to understand that we have personality difference as well, right? It's not even just that we all live in different countries or that we are an international community with, different languages. We also think differently. We weren't all raised the same. We had raised with different home styles and environments. And that does seep into the way that we communicate with each other and the way that we think about things. There's this concept called Conway's Law, which comes from computer science, a guy named Melvin Conway. And I'm going to have to paraphrase it a little bit here. But it says that basically when you're designing a system that interacts with people, it's going to mimic the behavior of the social structure that created that. So here we are writing software for WordPress, and it's all about human communication. That's ultimately what WordPress does. It gives people a voice, it's publishing. Well, our own behaviors can seep into that and influence the way that we write those things. I think P2 is a really good example of that, the P2 boards. And then lastly, in programming, there's this rock star mentality. We idolize a certain type of behaviors that maybe we shouldn't. And this is what I mean by this, right? Every company has that guy, and I hope that it's not me, but he's just so damn good that it's okay, right? It's okay that he's a poor communicator, or she, right? It's okay that the person works in silos. It doesn't matter that they're not commenting their code because, well, they wrote it, and if somebody has to maintain it later, they're the guy with the answers. So it's an acceptable form of laziness in a way. There are also some other problems with the rock star in the community, right? They can lead to other people feeling like they have imposter syndrome, right? So I think it's very easy to assume that when you see someone like this, that they know everything that you know, and then a little bit more, or a lot more. This is something that we have to really consider when we're building teams or putting together projects that are community driven. We want to make sure that everybody's a team player, and I think that we need to appreciate right. Like this guy is very valuable. He's very, very technically adept, but at the same time we want to try to maybe we can help the rock star out with being more empathetic. Maybe that's not something that comes easy for this person, and maybe we can help them out. So back to the empathy is transient. So the longer it's been there, the less you feel it. A really good example of that would be witnessing a car crash, right? You're in your car, you drive by, an awful accident happens in front of you. Natural reaction would be to slow down, but it doesn't last, right? You slow down for the next 10 miles, and then gradually your speedometer starts crawling back up. The pain of watching that accident faded with time. As does inspiration, right? So let's say that you become inspired, and you decide that you would like to go and maybe internationalize a plugin this week, and it doesn't take very long. Right? You're going to be less amped up to do that 5 days from now than you are right now. And that's just the nature of empathy. Now, we do have a tool to battle that, and that is empathy through code. Right? It's because of code propagation. If we do empathetic practices and we're able to do these things that help other people, right? It lives. It goes through GitHub. It goes through Stack Exchange. Right? These things live on. They don't fade. And that's a really, really powerful tool. So, running a little short on time here, so I'm going to have to kind of speed this up a little bit. I think it's important to know yourself, know who you are. In the way that, I don't consider myself to be particularly good at human empathy, that spawned me into looking into it more, right? Because I would like to be better. I would like to be better at those things, and it's difficult. One of the tools that most of us have encountered at some time in our career, Myers-Briggs Personality Type Indicator Test. This is a link to my favorite version of the test. It's about 60 questions. I appreciate if you didn't do it at the moment, but you can get that link later. So Myers-Briggs basically looks for personality preferences in people. So this is not a you are this type of person or you are this type of personality. It's expressing preferences for certain types of behavior. So, for example, some of us are introverted or have introverted leanings, and some of us are extroverted, right? And what that means is that some of us are energized by people, and some of us are exhausted by people. Intuition and sensing. This is whether you make decisions based on interpreted ideas, or whether you use the environment around you, your senses literally, to paint the picture, or do you infer things? Now, thinking and feeling. This is the one that I really want to talk about the most, and I feel is the most relevant to this part of the conversation. 2003, computer scientist working out of University of Toronto did a population study where he took a sampling of people in software engineering and compared them to the general population group. And what they found was the introversion and extroversion were not terribly important, right? You can be an excellent programmer regardless of that. What they did find was that the thinking feeling, right? So these are at polar ends of the opposite, and everyone falls at some point along the scale. It doesn't mean that you can only think or that you can only feel, but what it does mean is that you have a natural inclination to do one of those when presented with a problem. So what he found was, among computer developers, so if you take the ratio column on the far right, what that number is if one would be equality between the sample and the computer engineers, right? If the number is above 1, that means that that group is more represented in software development, and if it's below 1, it's less represented. And the one that really jumps out at you there is the 2.01 for thinking and the 0.321, which has to do with feeling. And feeling is the one that most people would associate with empathy, right? When presented with a problem, computer science or people that are attracted to the field are more inclined to try to rationalize the problem. I think about this, my wife's had a bad day and she comes home and she wants to tell me her problems and I try to solve it. And that's not the right answer. So software developers are a little different. The most represented type is introverted sensing, thinking, judging. Take the test, find out who you are if you don't know. R&D organizations tend to attract more of the people that prefer rigid thinking as opposed to the inferred types, right? More of deducing the problem than maybe doing something a little bit more rigid or structured. There's a prevalence of introverts. The thinking is grossly represented, and then the judging type. So what this really all comes down to is just knowing who you are, right? There's no right answer to these things. As development goes, I mean, engineering is not the same as it was 10 years ago. Web development is not the same as it is 10 years ago. We have UX, we have, DevOps, we have, developers, we have R&D. These things all play to different strengths and skills, and I think it's worth your time to figure out where your weaknesses are. So there is good news. WordPress promotes empathetic development. We're a very diverse community, right? We're global. We do these meets. There's a WordCamp, at least 1 or 2 every weekend, right? You can go and you can ask and you can interact with people, and that's one of the most important things about this community. I think it's one of the things that really differentiates us from any other technology community that I've ever been a part of, right? It's that ability for us to interact with each other in a way that, like I have agency experience. And if I sit down, I can relate to somebody in a way and we can talk about the problems in the agency. And this is something that the community in WordPress does a very good job of and continues to do. It's not perfect, but it is there. We do develop for the majority. That is in our mantra. So most of the time, that's part of the discovery process. We do try to think about this, especially in core development. It's created globally for a global audience, and it's possible to do these things, right? The little things that I'm talking about, making your code better. It's not hard. Anybody can do it. It's in the codex. If you don't know how to do it, you can find out. There are examples. There are examples of good behavior everywhere if you know where to look. Lastly, empathy is a learned skill. B.F. Skinner is the father of behavior analysis. He spent the better part of his life just researching human behavior in an empirical way, right, through laboratory testing. And what he found was that these things, empathy, sympathy, and compassion, these are learned skills, right? This is not something that we're born with. It's not genetic, and it's not a sentence. It's something that everyone in here can work on. So now what? So what I would like everyone to try, I'd like you to try to internationalize one of your plugins. Give it a shot. The thing that was most surprising to me through that process was just how good it made me feel. Right? I didn't do it for self-motivating reasons, but because I had considered other people that I had never interacted with, it felt really good to hear that I had helped someone that I'd never talked to. And I would really like to encourage you to get out there and try that. And for that, I think WP Engine is going to offer up some swag or internationalization merch or something to the first 100 people to do this. So if anybody is interested in do this, you want a little swag, send me an email and we'll see what we can do for you. You should provide accessibility to your users. You need to update those frameworks in gist. So maybe you're not really to bite off the internationalization thing. Maybe that's a little bit too much work. Go hit a code gist. Add some comments. Add some PHP doc. You know, someone is going to use that. Maybe you. It probably will be you. Something that we also almost never do is code reviews from a, how do you feel about what this is doing, right? Like, not does it work, and is this the most efficient and scalable way to perform the problem? Like, are we solving the right problem? And then practice, practice, practice. You can. Thank you.